I'll give you like a synopsis of kind of how I plan my fitness today, like in general. And so basically, I look at it on a weekly basis, and every week I try to get in some calisthenics, some yoga, some cardio with running and biking. And if I'm lucky, I get to go to the gym and kind of play around with the weights. That used to be what I would do pretty much 5, 6, 7 days a week, back in the day. So now I kind of do it like as a treat to myself or as like a little getaway, because I get to pop the earbuds in and just blast some hard rock music and heavy metal music. And it makes me reminisce of the times where I used to be more of a gym rat. But, as far as what I did literally today, today I was actually one of those days where I got to treat myself and go to the gym. When I go to the gym, I like to do my cardio and warm up first. So I ran 2 miles on the treadmill, then I did some kickboxing. And then after that, I just did some machines. I did some, when I do machines, I like to do the Smith machines, meaning where you stack the weights on them versus the selector ones. But, sometimes I do the selector machines, sometimes I do the cable machines, play around with the dumbbells, the barbells, and just have fun. There was a lot of things going on in my life that led to, becoming a raw foodist and coming into the natural hygiene. But one of the main drivers of that, along with those other concurrent elements that were happening in my life, was that, my fitness was starting to slack a little bit. I'm in my late 30s, I'm 39. As somebody with a yoga background and somebody who has been in this health and fitness for, over 23, 24 years since I had a weight loss experience in high school, and just seeing so many examples of people that live, well into their 50s, 60s and beyond with like these chiseled physiques, I kind of refuse to admit to myself that, if my workouts are kind of starting to slack a little bit and it's taking more energy out of me, that it's age. I was never going to be one of those people where it was like, well, I'm getting older, so, I guess my workouts, I'm going to start slowing down and it's going to, be harder for me to stay lean or harder for me to have energy after a workout. So once I got into this lifestyle and I started cleaning out my body, implementing the natural hygienic principles, doing some juice fasting, doing a little water fasting even more recently, I found that what I'm able to do to maintain and even become in better fitness and better health is a fraction of what I used to have to do to maintain the same level of fitness. And I'm just naturally gravitating more towards being outside when I work out, doing yoga, doing calisthenics outside, doing runs on the beach, taking my bike for a long bike ride along the Pinellas Trail here in St. Petersburg, Florida. And whenever I get a chance to do that barefoot and rewild my feet, then I'll do that as well. And I find that I feel better. I have less inflammation in my joints. I have more energy steadily throughout the day, instead of like do a big workout and then have a crash afterwards. So yeah, that's where I'm at today with my working out. And I just see that progressing even more towards calisthenics, yoga, and trying to maintain cardio just to keep the lymphatic system flowing. Yeah, I couldn't be more blessed to have found this information. I think a lot of people share the same sentiment, is that when they come into, veganism, raw veganism, fruitarianism, fasting, the juice cleansing, that we all kind of say the same thing, that we wish we would have done it sooner. So having only been doing this particular lifestyle for about 9.5 months now, since the beginning of 2025, I've been pretty steady on like what you would consider raw vegan. But the composition of my meals and what I eat in a day has evolved since January 1st, 2025. And I'll get into kind of how that evolved, but I'll just start by saying that the juiced fasts that I did one that was just over 3 weeks. I did one that was 6 weeks. And then I did a water fast that was 7.5 days. And so I'm looking to do more. I know those numbers are not what some people do. Some people go like, 2.5 years with no solid food, or some people do like these 42-day water fasts and things like that. And that's actually one of my goals to do, not for body composition or not for any sort of aesthetic reasons, more so for spiritual reasons. But, so when I started this diet, it was fruits and salads. But then I would be having these protein shakes. And the protein shakes were kind of, I guess you could say, a transition sort of tactic from my old way of eating into how I eat now. And it was the vegan protein, the pea protein, chia, flax, blueberry, banana. But that's something that I ended up eliminating. In the beginning, I started, I still felt hungry for like more sustenance or more earthy sort of foods. And so I found myself eating a lot of nuts. And, just to back up a little bit, in mid 2023 is when I started tinkering around with some fasting, and I started tapering down my animal products and having more salads and fruits as a meal composition. So I've been leading into this for about 1.5 years. But still, when you take out the cooked starches, and when you take out, the last animal product that I was eating was boiled eggs, and sometimes a fried egg, I think it takes a little while for your body to get used to functioning completely on plant foods, whether it's a microbiome thing or more of an energetic thing. I'm not sure how to explain that. But what ended up happening with, I was eating pretty well with fruits and salads, but I was having a lot of nuts as a part of my diet. And so I ended up gaining body fat, and my body wasn't really in tune to the living foods yet. So I don't think that my body was used to building muscle off of that type of material yet. So I kind of became skinny fat. I did a juice fast. I lost a bunch of weight. I felt amazing. And after that juice fast, I started eliminating how much fat I was consuming. Instead of having a bunch of nuts, I would just have some avocado in my salads. And then the next juice fast I did, I started to eliminate caffeine. I was still drinking black coffee. And I know you guys are going to be like, Blake, no, slap on the wrist, and I know I was kind of a caffeine junkie. And so I tapered down the coffee. I went from I used to brew coffee in, like one of those drip coffee with the, I guess the carafe you would call it. And then I went into this organic instant coffee to where I could kind of control myself a little bit better and have 1 cup of coffee. And then I eventually eliminated that as well. And throughout that time, my body composition kept changing as a result of what I was eating. I was getting naturally leaner. My body weight was coming down, and my body was adjusting to living off of these live foods. And I was able to build muscle back without, having to rely on those protein shakes or any of the denser foods that I was eating prior to this year and, doing the raw food lifestyle. So I kind of share that story with your audience, Seth. And, for anyone who's listening, that when you undergo this lifestyle, there's going to be some adjustments that you're going to do. You're going to learn from some mistakes. But if you listen to me, if you listen to Seth and some of the other people, in this space, you can learn from our mistakes and you can speed up that process. And so, I would recommend being as low fat as possible in the beginning. And I would recommend leaning on the fruits as much as possible. And when you make your salads, make a simple salad. Try to use the non-sweet fruits in your salad. I love making zoodles with zucchini. And I have this little shredder that I got on Amazon, and it makes these nice little noodles out of my zucchini. But zucchini is actually a fruit. I'll put tomatoes and bell peppers or jalapeno peppers and cucumber in my salads. Those are all fruits as well. And then a tender leafy green, whether it's lettuce or these packs of greens that I get at Aldi that are organic greens, and they've got a couple different types of greens in there that I find to be delicious. kind of the next thing on the chopping block for me in my diet is salt. So I've greatly reduced how much salt. I used to be kind of a salt fiend. And just to give you guys a little bit of an aside on that, I come to find out that, if your adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys and control your energy and your hormones, those become taxed when you're indulging in a lot of caffeine. And also, if you're kind of like a crazy fitness person like I used to be, where you're doing all these workouts, and you're doing sauna and ice bath, all these things are what the hygienist would call innervation. And they're going to tax your adrenal glands, and you start to have adrenal fatigue. And that is actually going to make you crave salt, because salt is kind of stimulating to the adrenal glands. So the more clean that I've got my body, the healthier that I've become. I'm craving salt less, and I'm tapering that down as well. My ultimate goal for what I want my meal compositions to be moving forward is I want to just eat less quantity. I want more of my calories to come from mono fruit meals. And I want to take more breaks in between eating, like throughout the week, like do a day during the week where I don't eat and have like a fasting day. I think that's called like a monk fast or something like that, and do more periodic shorter term fasts. I typically, I know this is probably not the best thing, but when I'm fasting, I typically, I like to stay pretty active. And I think that I end up losing a lot of weight, and I'm not super, super comfortable with getting really, really low on weight, because I've already lost about 25 pounds since starting this journey. I went from about 200, and I told you I was kind of skinny fat in the beginning and my weight would fluctuate. I have metrics as of July 1st, I weighed 202 pounds, and now I'm going around like 175. So that's just shy of 30 pounds. But yeah, that's my goal for the future. But yeah, right now, I'll give you maybe I should have started with this, but like what I would eat in the day is I would wake up, do my yoga, do my cardio, maybe do sauna, ice bath, maybe do calisthenics, come home, have a big bowl of oranges and bananas at around noonish, 11ish, noonish, wait a couple hours, have a melon, or like a half of a big honeydew, or half of a big cantaloupe. This time of year in the summertime, it was watermelon. Wait another few hours, have one of those big salads that I mentioned with the zoodles, peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, and leafy greens. And then wait another couple hours after doing some more work, and I might have some grapes for dessert. So kind of like 4 smallish meals, a couple hours apart, in about an 8-hour eating window, intermittent fasting style. This was kind of like my origin story. And so I'll be happy to kind of go back into, how I got started. And I was born and raised in Minnesota. So for anyone who doesn't know kind of like what rural and, kind of on the outskirts of rural and suburban Minnesota is like, it's very blue collar, and it's very, a lot of farming. There's a lot of like agriculture. My father was a mechanic. My mother worked in hospitals. And so it was just work, 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 work. And the climate up there is very unforgiving. A lot of people in Michigan, Chicago, Iowa, the surrounding areas, if you ask them if they're familiar with Minnesota, they would be like, oh yeah, Minnesota's way colder. Even from Wisconsin and like Milwaukee, Madison, Wisconsin. It's just something about where Minnesota is geographically. And so about 7 to 8 months sometimes, it can be very cold and uncomfortable and very gray. And just a lot of work, shoveling, doing manual labor type of thing. And that's how I grew up. I have a Scandinavian background, and kind of the culture with that is meat and potatoes and stick to your ribs sort of food that'll keep you warm in the winter and put hair on your chest, my family used to say. And that's just, it's part of the culture, and it's how I grew up. And what would end up happening is, in the summertime, I loved the summertime growing up. I would be active. I would be outdoors. I would be trying to do all these, um, you know, fitness type of things. But then when winter come around, I would be more sedentary, and I would have this seasonal weight gain, you know, and so that would kind of yo-yo pattern my weight. And then, of course, going through puberty and going to high school, I'm becoming bigger. I'm naturally kind of like a bigger built sort of person. And, there was one year where my weight was approaching 300 pounds. I don't know exactly what I topped out at, but it was way up there, and just huge. So, I had some experiences where, prior to that one season where my weight really, really topped out, that summertime prior to that, I had met some friends at business camp, and I had met some girls. I was 15 years old, so girls are starting to become interesting to me and everything like that. And I'm like, oh, these girls are flirting with me. This is so cool. And I'm making all these new friends that are geeking out about business stuff, which is the same stuff that I like. All the people at my high school, all they cared about was like, either football or whatever, or dirt bikes or something like that. So I was super excited to see them for this reunion that we had about 6-7 months after that. But that was after I had gained all this weight. And so when they saw me for the first time and they saw me with all this weight on me, they kind of were like confused. They were like not wanting to include me in their group anymore. And when the girls were ignoring me, that was probably the nail in the coffin, where I was like, oh my God, that feels terrible. So I was like, you know what? I'm taking this into my own hands. And I knew that exercise is a way to lose weight. So my family had a Nordic track cross-country skiing cardio machine in the garage. And so I would, put on my jacket and go out there and start doing cardio. And I would have the TV on. And this is when people would still watch like television channels. And I would pop on an episode of The Simpsons and try to work my way up to 30 minutes. And then after The Simpsons was Seinfeld. And then I would try to work my way up to an hour. So as I was doing that, I was also, I like to get out of the house, and I like to, one of my favorite places to hang out was Barnes and Noble, and just kind of chill and read at Barnes and Noble, because my parents were both working anyway. And so I would research what's the best diet to do, for health, for weight loss. And I would just kind of scan and read all these books. And of course, there's a bunch of books that had like this fad diet sort of stuff. And the same type of thing is still happening today. But the one that made the most sense to me when I read it was the Alkaline Diet book. And they make a claim that whatever food you eat, it can affect your body's pH. And it shows a bunch of studies that, sick people have been tested, and they're shown to have a more acidic pH. Healthy people have been tested. They're shown to have a more alkaline pH. So they postulated that, it's going to be very hard for any disease to propagate if you keep your body's pH high. And if the food that you're eating affects your pH, then you should eat foods that keep your pH more alkaline. And of course, these are going to be your fruits and your vegetables. At that time, they also gave pH values to animal products. And of course, eggs, chicken, fish are going to be less acidic on your pH than like pork and beef and bacon and, all that stuff. They talk about fried foods, processed foods, condiments, of course, salt, oil, stimulants. They're all going to be acidifying to your pH. So with that in mind, and looking at this alkaline food chart, I was like, okay, well, I can just eat like steamed vegetables, salads, fruits, lean meats like eggs and chicken and fish, and then rice and potatoes were my starches. And I tried to soak my rice and potatoes before cooking them to get some of the starch out, and so it has a lower glycemic impact. So it was basically just a healthy whole foods diet that allowed me to lose 100 pounds. And then coming back in for the football season after that summer, my teammates were like, "Whoa, what happened? You got shredded, man." And I was like, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." But what was even more gratifying, I guess, than everybody like giving me compliments, because those were the same people that were like, not really my friend when I was heavier, so I didn't really care what they thought. But it was the fact that I could keep up with them in practice now, and the fact that I could outperform them on the field, and the fact that I was getting starting positions ahead of them and beating the former people that were, kind of treating me like a second class citizen because I was, larger built and overweight. So that basically, though, that was I guess a glow up, or like an ugly duckling, becoming a swan type of situation, that really solidified me always keeping up on my exercise and my cardio and trying to eat a whole foods diet. And yes, I allow myself some cheat meals on the weekends, but for the most part, 23 years of consistency, because I vowed to never gain that weight back, and I didn't. But that kind of leads us into what you asked me about how I eat now, and what I told everyone about how my workouts were starting to, slow down a little bit. And I refused to admit that it was because of age. And then after cleansing out my body with juice fasting and having some experiences where I would have a number 2 during my fast, and then when I would look down, it would be this very peculiar stuff that people talk about, the controversial mucoid plaque, that I felt like I had reversed the clock about 10 years, and I'm able to now do things that I never thought I could do, especially at my age. You and I were talking about calisthenics routines, and doing some of those moves really reshapes your body and really rebuilds your body. And it's only because my body's a little bit lighter now and I'm a little more flexible that I'm even able to do some of these moves. So I feel like I have a whole new lease on life. I will answer the first part of your question with an honest answer and an honest no. I don't have the same exact, just super top end power strength that I used to have in the gym. And, my 1 rep max for squat, for bench, maybe not deadlift, because that's just like kind of my bread and butter lift that I've always kind of been good at. Maybe my max hasn't gone too far down on that. But everything else, yeah, I've lost a little brute force strength. But what do you expect? I'm about 25 pounds lighter. And I'm not eating these animal products and cooked foods that are not just because of protein. It's because there's other stimulants perhaps going on there. Dr. Morse talks about how when you eat the flesh of an animal, that you're eating that animal's hormones. And we're humans, we're a lot smaller than a cow. So if we take a cow's hormones that are in a cow's flesh, it's going to, be very stimulating to us. Not to mention the conversation about how, if these cows are fearful before they are harvested, and they have some of that fear hormone coursing through their flesh, does that adrenaline get stuck in the meat, and is that stimulating your muscle growth? Perhaps. So yes, if you guys are like these power lifters and if you guys are huge bodybuilders, then expect to lose some weight and maybe some top end power. But I'll quote another prominent figure in this realm, Aris Latam. He says that, when you adopt this lifestyle, you're not really losing weight, you're losing waste. If I look at pictures of myself when I was 200 pounds and just brute force, I looked puffy. Yeah, I look bigger and fuller, but I'm wearing some of I'm looking at my monitor here, I'm wearing some of the same clothes that I would wear back then, and it's like loose. But when I look at myself, I look younger, I look more fit. And as somebody who's very, I used to be a bouncer, a personal trainer. I'm very kind of socially aware and crowds and in group settings and stuff like that, probably to a fault, too much. But you can notice how people are reacting to you. And the way that people react to me now is a much more safer and a much more pleasant and open sort of feeling. And that's going to lead me into the next answer to your question, but not to digress into that right now. I want to tell you guys about the positive things that are going to happen, with your performance in the gym. My cardio has skyrocketed. I'm breathing through my nose when I'm running and cycling. I'm not huffing, puffing, mouth breathing. I'm able to have a cadence of breathing synced up with my motions through my nose. And that's actually further detoxifying, further alkalinizing my body. I'm able to do agile sort of calisthenics moves, those side-to-side yogi squats, as I call them. The Sanskrit term for that asana is called skandasana, or you can also call them kind of like speed skater squats or whatever. I used to have kind of some trouble getting down deep into that motion just because I had so much muscle on my thighs and my glutes and everything like that. Now I'm going side to side. And I did that Monday, and my glutes are still sore from that. And prior, even with all that heavy lifting, it's like, it would be kind of more of a challenge for me to target and isolate my glutes and have soreness back there. And so I'm like completely reshaping my body. My posture's getting better. I'm able to be more flexible in yoga. I'm able to do now headstand and handstand way better than I ever could before. And so this is a result of just physically losing weight off your body, not ingesting these animal products that have animal hormones in them that are stimulating you and perhaps affecting how you think and feel as well. And when you're able to perform better and do more cardio, and have more endurance and have better sleep and all that other stuff, it creates this snowball effect. And it's like you feel like this juggernaut sort of dynamo energy happening in your life physically. How I feel now after having adopted this lifestyle, I tell you all of the fitness things first to tell you that yes, that's important and that's exciting. And that's really gratifying for me, especially as a yoga instructor and personal trainer and stuff. But the energetic changes are I just have such a gratitude for that. I'm so much more chilled out. I'm so much more go with the flow now. I'm so forgiving. I've mended old wounds with relationships amongst my family and friends and neighbors. I've made amends. I've built new relationships with really strong foundations. I've believed in myself more. I've been less of a people pleaser. I've been operating less out of lower desires, for sex and money. And so I feel like cleaning out your body, eating clean, not eating animal products, it changes not just your physical body, but also your mental, emotional, spiritual bodies as well. And that's even more profound. And, I'll be walking along the trail. It's right behind my apartment here. And we have some wildlife and stuff like that, some cool birds like some screech owls and woodpeckers and some black racer snakes and, of course, a bunch of squirrels and other birds and lizards and frogs. Animals will just kind of come up to me and they're not scared of me. And insects and butterflies and grasshoppers, these big lubber grasshoppers that are like the size of a hot dog almost. It's incredible. Whereas I can very palpably remember before that, dogs and everything else, they were kind of like weary for me. Was that the energy that I was carrying around in my life, that I'm on guard or that I'm dominant or that I'm aggressive and carrying around this weightlifter and I'm a gym guy. and, I'm a martial artist and I'm tough and all this other energy. I didn't feel like I was walking around like that. I felt like I was already pretty chill because I was a yoga dude and a beach dude and stuff like that. But there was a shred of that still left in my being. So getting rid of all of that energy and just being totally open and totally relaxed, that has probably changed my life so much, because we're our own worst critic. I think I was really hard on myself and over perfectionist with myself, because I grew up in a very demanding environment within my family where we had to do things for our survival to live, and there was no room for error. When it involves keeping your house warm or whatever, or being able to go to work and shoveling the driveway and plowing and stuff. So that's the biggest benefit for me on this lifestyle. And I'm just scratching the surface now. So I'm treating this like I'm a very humble student of natural hygiene and of this sort of lifestyle. And I learned from people like yourself and, all the other awesome creators who have been walking this walk longer than myself. And, that's why my goals are to move more towards what you're doing, super clean, no salt, heavy on the fruits, and just cleaning it up and experimenting with more fasting and just seeing how far I can take the spiritual side of things. That's becoming more important to me than the physical. But I will just caution people to not lose touch with at least moving your body, moving the lymphatic system, keeping some physical fitness, doing walks, doing jogs, because I think you have to still maintain your vessel to the best of your ability. If your goals are, upper tier health and longevity, as what are my goals. I've done a few interviews and I haven't really had a chance to dive into this as deeper as I wanted to yet, because I would, listen back at some of my old stuff, which, quick plug, you can check out my YouTube channel and check out my Instagram if you want to watch that stuff back. But I'm always like, man, I wish I would have, touched on some of that a little bit deeper and went a little bit more in depth. So here's my chance to do it. And I'll just start by sharing with you guys how I got into it. I mentioned in the beginning of the years when I started the raw foods and started with the juice cleansing and the water fasting, after I had been tapering down for about a year and a half, vegetarian, minimal cooked food, salads, fruits, and then fully raw starting at the beginning of the year. Well, for Christmas of 2024, I decided to pull the trigger on a huge Christmas present for myself. And I bought the Nama J2 juicer. It's one of the most popular juicers. It's probably the Cadillac of, slow masticating juicers. And it just works great. And so along with that, I bought the 32 ounce quart jars, the glass jars that you would put your juice in. And I just had it sitting in my living room here. And I was like, okay, I want to do this juice fast. I've been watching different creators like Shane Sterling, Dan McDonald, Lou Corona, Jillian Berry, all the people that have done juice cleanses and had amazing results and perhaps even eliminated mucoid plaque. So I was like, all right, here's the game plan. I'm going to be raw for a little while. I have my birthday coming up in February, towards the end of February. After my birthday, that's when I'll do a juice fast, right? So as fate would have it, at the end of January, I actually injured my ankle in yoga. And it was actually a Bikram yoga studio where the people that go to the studio and the owner herself, her name is Sarah, she's amazing. I don't know if she's psychic or if there's some sort of energy going on at that studio, but I've had some really crazy sort of psychic activations after taking the Bikram class there. And if you guys haven't looked up Bikram yoga, I would strongly recommend that for the straightness of your spine. That's supposedly going to help the energy channels flow through your spine and allow you to channel energy. But so I set an intention, as you usually do in the beginning of that yoga class, I remember. And I was like, I want to take this raw foods, and I wanted to change my life, and I want to help other people change their life. And that was along the lines of what the intention that I set in that yoga class. And then, after the yoga class, I think during the yoga class, I'm doing one of these asanas or postures where I'm squatting down, and it kind of like broke my ankle a little bit, or snapped my tendon in my ankle a little bit. I didn't feel it until after the fact. And then the next day it was swollen up and I couldn't even walk on it. It was so painful. I felt like a little tear action, not going to lie. And I didn't know if it was like tears of pain or tears of self-pity, but it doesn't really matter, because I literally could not walk on my freaking left foot. I was hobbling around my apartment on my right foot, So all those creators, and then especially creators like Lauren Lockman, who's had some injuries himself. And he said, every time that I have an injury, I'm just going to start fasting. And that allows the body to heal itself in extremely rapid time. So I was like, okay, let me do the math here. I will have just enough time to do a 3-week juice fast before my birthday. And we'll do the juice fast now so that I can heal my freaking ankle. So whether or not the fates aligned and my intention that I set in that yoga class kind of spurred this on, but either way, that ankle injury is one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it prompted me to start doing this juice fast. And after watching some of those creators, like I mentioned, I had an idea in my mind of what juices that I wanted to be doing and what recipes I wanted to be doing. And so I just started doing it. I just threw myself right into it. I would make certain juice concoctions. And to be honest, I like the mono juices the best, except if I'm making like a green juice. Then I'll throw a couple different things in there, some cucumber, celery, carrot, some greens, whatever. And I have all these recipes and my entire protocol for if people want to contact me and learn more about that. So, I start the juice fast. The first couple of days, I'm still having a number 2. It was the food that I had been eating, the salads and fruits and stuff, nuts that I had been eating prior. But then after the first 2 days, let's say, I didn't have any other movements, any other number 2, until about around like day 10. And then I started having liquid stools. And I was like, okay, well, that's, I guess, to be expected. I didn't know that would happen. I think I've heard that would happen to some people, but, and then it continued to happen. Day 11, day 12, 13, and it started to become very uncomfortable. And it started to get to the point where I was apprehensive about going in public or going for long distances where I didn't have a bathroom nearby. And so I'm like, this is kind of ridiculous. I think that I need to just stop, But I had purchased psyllium husk and bentonite clay, but I was on the fence about using it. I know that some people say that, like Dr. Morse would say, that if you're not careful with it, it can cause impaction, meaning it can get stuck in the pockets inside your intestines, and that can be really bad. And then some people say that, if you do eliminate the mucoid plaque and you're using those supplements, that it's not what people think it is. It's not mucoid plaque at all. It's just that you're eliminating the psyllium husk and the bentonite clay. Kind of feel a movement starting. And I was doing just gentle yoga throughout my juice fast that I was doing. And I remember laying in savasana, which is just when you lay on the mat. And you do like a little meditation at the end of your class. I remember the sensation of rice. And I can't really describe it. It's almost like if you had just eaten a bowl of rice and it just kind of feels, I just ate rice and it's nice, or something like that. Or if you ate rice and you need to go to the bathroom, you're like, oh, that's the rice on the way out. It was something along those lines of that feeling. Just the feeling of rice overcame my body. And I hadn't eaten rice in months, So then, I get up after yoga, I go to the restroom, I have a number 2, and it didn't feel like liquid stools. I was expecting it to be liquid, but it felt different. And then I get up off the toilet, I look around into the toilet, and Oh my God. Lo and behold, it's mucoid plaque. I could not believe it. I cleaned myself up a little bit, went to the kitchen. I got a spatula that I never planned on using again, and I will never use again for culinary purposes. And I start digging around in the toilet, and it's this rubbery, kind of slimy. It's kind of like slinky shaped a little bit, or accordion shaped, and it's rubbery in the fact that I could lift it out of the toilet with the spatula and it was still staying intact, wrapped around the spatula. Gravity was not like pulling it apart. And when I lifted it out of the water, that's when I could really smell, because when it's in the water, you can't, but when it's in the air and you can smell it, oh my God, I hope this isn't too much for you guys listening, but it was nasty, guys. It smelled like death. It smelled like roadkill. It smelled putrid. It smelled rancid. If you guys have ever had, like, I don't know, took a whiff of roadkill or had some meat go bad in the fridge, it was terrible. And as soon as I had that movement, that sensation of rice that I was telling you about, that I experienced during yoga, that sensation went completely away. So, I was relying heavily kind of on rice and as a taper down food, in the year and a half leading up to my raw journey. So I strongly think that the starch in the rice was what was helping to make this mucoid plaque accumulate in my body. And so that's why I'm pretty adamantly opposed against eating rice again. But, that was day 15. And then I ended up going 23 days on this particular juice fast. Every single day after day 15, once or twice a day, I would have a movement and it would be more mucoid plaque. And I have some very gnarly pictures. I haven't put them out there publicly on the internet. I kind of don't want anyone to steal them. I don't know. Like, I find them as valuable because but if anybody wants to see them, I'll send them to you as a DM or whatever. So I've seen different like juice fasting coaches and different people recommend the psyllium husk and the bentonite clay. And the way that they say to use it is way too excessive, in my opinion, based on what I heard Dr. Morse talk about it, potentially causing impaction. I would take a tablespoon of psyllium husk and a teaspoon of the clay, and I would mix it together in water in a glass and make like a slurry. And it would start expanding in the glass. And it would be kind of like a cream of wheat sort of texture or something like that. I put a little cinnamon in there just for flavor and down the hatch. So I was using, in my opinion, a very small amount of the psyllium husk and bentonite clay relative to what I've seen other people recommend. And the amount of plaque that was coming out of my body, large ropey chunks of it, that is not the same volume as this little bit of psyllium husk and clay that I was taking. And just the color of it, the smell of it, it's impossible that this little stuff would, amount to that sheer volume and rancidity of that mucoid plaque. So anybody who thinks it's a myth, you're wrong. You might call it something else, or you might think it originates somewhere else. But I think we all need to come clean, and we all need to just come together and have a kumbaya moment and say that this stuff that is stuck inside of people is real, and it would really help people to get it out of their body. I think the natural hygienist would say that, this stuff is the cause of toxicity and toxemia. And that's pretty much one of the biggest underlying root causes of most health problems. And that's my personal thought. I'm not a scientific, doctoral sort of study person. I think a lot of people that are not in this movement or whatever, I just had some people commenting on one of my YouTubes like, you're wrong. You need to get these minerals from meat. You have to eat meat and you have to eat this stuff to get this sort of stuff. They're quoting from studies. I'm kind of a person that is like, I like to just use my body as a science experiment. And I will say that at the end of my water fast that I did, where I was not taking psyllium husk or bentonite clay throughout that 7.5 day water fast, I did release old hard matter as well. It was just very different from the mucoid plaque that I'm calling it from my juice fast. At the end of my water fast, there were like 3 golf balls, and they were almost as hard as golf balls. And I tried to, with that same spatula, I tried to chop one of them in half, and I had to press down to chop one of these old hard matter things in half. So I'm not sure if maybe the citric acid in the juices, or some of the minerals and vitamins, flavones, whatever, help to kind of like make it a thinner consistency or a more rubbery consistency. I don't know. I can tell you that my sensation that I just kind of intuitively felt, and who knows if this is correct or not, is that, after the watery stools started happening at around day 10 or so, and then it continued on for 3-4 days before I took the supplement, it's the way that it felt to me is that at day 10, when the watery stools started happening, that it's almost as if that's when some of this mucoid plaque was starting to become loosened out and starting to flow free in my small intestine. But because it didn't have any binders to it, or it didn't have any fiber to help sweep it out, that the peristalsis motion of digestion didn't have anything to grab onto. So I kept on, it was like my body was trying to move it out, but it couldn't. It's like holding onto a slippery rope, So I kept on having these watery stools. And as soon as I took the psyllium husk and the bentonite clay, gave it some fiber, gave it some binders, gave it something to maybe have a little bit of volume, it's kind of weird how like that abruptly stopped the watery stools from happening. And then that immediately was able to give my digestive action, that peristalsis, undulating motion of your intestines, perhaps a grip, something to hold on to with that matter to then push its way out. So whether it's a coating of the lining, whether it's in the pockets, or whether it's kind of like in the tissues and it's just kind of coming out and coagulating inside your intestines, I don't really know. I'm pretty in touch with my body. I'm pretty in tune with my body. I have this yoga background, fitness background, and stuff like that. I could feel that it basically felt as though I prematurely ended the juice fast, and that when I started eating again, it kicked me out of that sort of detox mode. But it's going to be pretty difficult for somebody to release the mucoid plaque if they're still eating, even if it's raw vegan or even if it's just fruitarian. So then I do another juice fast a few months later, starting on July 1st. And after having the first one done, learning what recipes I like, learning which order to drink the juices throughout the day, learning how much I should work out and how intensely I should work out. And if I work out and kind of overdo it and I feel like I need more sustenance, what can be a solution to that? So I learned all this stuff throughout the first juice fast. I'd start doing the second juice fast. I had gained a lot of that weight back, and that's when I weighed 202 pounds on July 1st, because I was going too hard on the nuts and probably too hard on the salt during that amount of time, and just too much volume of food. And so I do this second juice fast, and this one ended up being 6 weeks, which is 42 days. And so the best thing about that juice fast is that because it was in the summer, watermelon was in season. And I got to really leverage the power of watermelon. I would juice the rind right along with the flesh of the watermelon. And that really helped. So you can do it in the wintertime. And I have some other tips and tricks, like for this next one that I'm going to do that's going to be in the wintertime, to where you can kind of mitigate not having the watermelon. But if you do it in the summer, it's a huge boon for you to have that watermelon. So this juice fast is going freaking amazing. My body remembers how the first one went, and it's like whenever you do a fast, I feel like the body's like, oh, he's doing this to me again. All right, here we go. Let's go into autophagy, or let's go into juice fasting mode. And So again, towards the end of the fast, same exact thing. I started getting some liquid stools, and I'm like, oh, we're not going to let that happen again. So I start doing my little bentonite clay and psyllium husk slurry, and I start eliminating mucoid plaque. And same exact thing, like clockwork, every single day. And this time it happened for maybe like 10, 13, I don't know. I'd have to go back and count my pictures of how many days straight, and sometimes twice a day, that I would pass the stuff out of my body. But towards the end of that 42 days, I started to really feel like I kind of wanted to quit, to be entirely honest, because I felt like I was starting to hit the wall. My energy levels were kind of in the tank, and I didn't, obviously I didn't like that feeling. But at the same time, the mucoid plaque was starting to slow down, and the chunks that were coming out were starting to be smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And I can tell you that there were a couple times where no mucoid plaque came out, but I would still have a movement that would just be the clay and the psyllium husk. And the clay and the psyllium husk alone, when it comes out, it looks a lot different than the other stuff. So, that I don't know how to describe that or how to explain that. But what I think was happening is that I was getting to the end of most of the mucoid plaque that I could remove with the juice fasting out of my body. I was cleaning pretty much the bulk of it out. And what I felt like my body was doing towards the end of the 6-week juice fast is, now that it got the mucoid plaque out, it was starting to like intelligently switch gears on its own and go deeper into my tissues. And because it was starting to go deeper into my tissues, and my tissues were dumping some, who knows, old beer, old, weed, I don't know, old Asian buffet from, 10, 15, 20 years ago or something like that, 30 years ago, who knows? And that's what was making me have this lethargic sort of energy lull, sort of symptoms and feelings, almost like a healing crisis sort of thing. So that's what was happening. I was starting to scratch the surface of that deep cleaning towards the end of the 6-week juice fast, and I felt like I got all the mucoid plaque out. And so then I ended the 6-week juice fast with fruits. We're still in like mid-August. And then I took a trip back to Minnesota, and I was just eating salads and fruits, snacking on a few almonds and stuff like that. But after that juice fast, I eliminated a lot of the extra fats, and lowered my salt, lowered my caffeine even more. And so, yeah, I didn't gain as much weight back. And then after this water fast that I just recently did a few weeks ago, now I'm no caffeine, minimal salt, and very, very minimal fat. And I'm at kind of, I think, a good homeostasis right now. And then I can just do some little adjustments here and there. But what prompted me to start the water fast is that I knew that at the end of that 6-week juice fast, that I was starting to get deeper into my tissues. And I knew that water fasting is a much deeper clean than juice fasting, or so I had heard. And so, yeah, I jumped right into that because I wanted to get it done before the Texas Fruit Festival, kind of so I could share some war stories with people and have that experience going into it. But I did not expect what was going to happen at the end of my water fast, which is it threw me into a very terrible healing crisis right before the Texas Fruit Festival. And that was not cool. But I got through it. And like I said, I released some hard matter at the end of it. And now I've pretty much gotten through that healing crisis, and my energy levels are back. I think my adrenal glands are still kind of healing up because I had kind of run them pretty hard with the caffeine and the working out for kind of a long time. So I think that's just going to take a little bit of time. But to your point earlier, the low fat, raw vegan, mucusless, simple meal combinations, simple food combinations type of lifestyle, this is probably the best I've ever felt in my life. The Essene Gospel of Peace is It's near and dear to my heart. I told you after my 6-week juice fast, I took a trip and went to Minnesota to see some family. And, you know, my grandparents are still alive. I'm 39 years old, and not many people my age can say that their grandparents are still alive. So I just feel so blessed that I'm able to still go see them. And they are extremely Christian. They're like church every Sunday. They used to be involved with the church and doing bookkeeping and doing ushering and doing all that stuff. So it was kind of a big part of my upbringing because I was one of the first of their, well, I was the first of their grandchildren. And so they babysat me a lot. And there's a certain energy about when people are living that Christianity sort of lifestyle and they're following the teachings of Jesus and following the word that's given in the Bible. You know, treat thy neighbor as your family, as your brother. Treat others the way that you want to be treated. Turn the other cheek. Forgive people; they know not what they do. You know, and I know there's a couple things in the Bible, like the Daniel fast, and there's a couple things about health in there. Prayer and fasting is mentioned in the Bible, but you know, there was always kind of a disconnect with me and Christianity because I had some experiences when I was younger, and when they would pass around the collection plate, the pastor was saying like it's God's money anyway and stuff like that. And I knew that money was tight in my family growing up, and it just, I don't know, it just kind of made me see kind of at an early age that it was a business as well. And it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, to be honest. And I wish it didn't. I wish I would have gone a little bit more down the Christian road. But now, you know, I have some Christian friends, and there's a family that kind of took me in as their own. Like they were like my Florida family, I call them, because I've been down here 14 years, and you know they're highly Christian as well. So I love their energy. I love how just generous they are, and they're welcoming, and they open you in their house and stuff. But I've always had a hard time looking past some of the dogma sort of stuff and just sort of like just the literal translation of the Bible and you know following the word to a T, where I personally think that it's more of an allegorical writing and parable sort of, you know, Jesus speaks in parables type of thing. But when I came into this knowledge and my first experience with the Essene Gospel of Peace, there's actually a recording on YouTube of a guy reading it. And I was walking along the beach and listening to it. That was my first experience with it. And it was just flooding my mind with tying the physical and the fasting and something that I had valued in my own life so much, because I see the people in my family making unhealthy food choices, not exercising, gaining weight, having health problems, being on pharmaceuticals, seeing how that changes them and changes their personality, and just feeling like it's just not fair. And I'm just, no matter what I do to try to help them or try to inspire them to at least get your steps in, like get sweaty and out of breath a couple times a week, like go do some yoga or whatever. They're never going to do that. And I feel bad for them because they're just kind of making their own bed and sleeping in it, and almost like unconsciously. And you know, as somebody who really values the teachings of yoga, their system is like a lifestyle system. It involves the spirituality piece, but it also involves the health piece as well. So when I was listening to the Essene Gospel of Peace as I was walking along the beach, I was like, man, this is what was missing. Like this is I knew it. Like I knew that there had to be something like this with Christianity. Like, you know, this completes the story of Jesus for me. This completes the painting of who he was. This makes so much more sense about the life of Jesus and his teachings, and the fact that he valued physical health very, very, very highly. And it's very clearly stated in the Essene Gospel of Peace. It just gave me such more of a reverence for not only my journey, it kind of like made me you know, honor my own journey a little bit more, which we can all do, and kind of like like, good job, Blake. You know what I mean? We can all kind of like, I think we're too hard on ourselves sometimes. And this is a hard, Earth is a hard place to live. Like, there's a lot of stuff we got to juggle just to pay our bills and survive and stuff. So it also gave me more reverence for my family and more patience and um, respect for them, and not really judging them for their lifestyle decisions as much. And also, when I went and saw my grandparents, who are super Christian, we had a long talk about all this stuff. And that's going to be one of my most cherished memories of my life. And come to find out, I never knew this, but back in the day when my grandparents were young, they would do prayer and fasting as a part of their church. And I think they went like 21 days sometime at one time, they were saying. I'm like, oh my God, that's crazy. That's so cool. And I would have never known that stuff. And I was telling them about my new lifestyle, with the fruits and mostly fruitarian, adding some simple salads and stuff. And they're like, well, when we would watch you, ever since you were a baby, I would mash up bananas and feed them to you, my grandmother said, because like my mom wasn't there for breastfeeding or anything, So, I mean, I've been on the fruits, bro, for like my whole life, 39 years, man. And so it closed a lot of loops in my mind, I guess, and it tied together more of a reference of my upbringing. And it helped me to let go judgments on people for their lifestyle decisions, because it's so hard and so difficult. And I think I take for granted sometimes that I'm one of those people that I treat my body as an experiment, and I have the discipline to stick to it and see it through. And it's not like that for everyone. For some people, it might be a little bit more difficult, And then when we started your book club, I actually read it myself. I read the pages of it rather than listen to it. And that was just like, oh my God, Seth, thank you so much for having that book club, man, and for inviting me into it. And it was so cool to be a part of that first episode when you were here and we did it together live. We had such good discussion. All the people in the book club that are asking questions about it, I don't know how old the Dead Sea Scrolls are, but if this was the time of Jesus, and if we, take the timetables literally, then this was like 2,000 years ago, roughly, that they were doing, that Jesus was helping these sick people do fasting, prayer, and even enemas. And that's the same exact thing that the natural hygienists do. The first hygienic books that I read were Arnold Ehret, and then I went into Hilton Hotima, and now I'm working through Herbert Shelton. It's crazy because before I discovered this hygienic knowledge and this wealth of knowledge, and I just didn't know that it existed, I was actually writing a book, and it was called Doing the Work. And it had a lot of the same fundamentals that hygiene has, that natural hygiene has. Going outside, getting sunlight, getting fresh air, making sure you have good sleep, making sure you have good drinking water and that your water is of good quality and clean, making sure that you eat a clean whole foods diet, making sure that you make time for just yourself, making sure that you maintain good relationships with everybody else, making sure that you have a purpose and a service and a gift to give back to the world, because that's going to give back to you tenfold. And it's like, those are all the same principles of hygiene. And so I don't know if this is in my DNA, man, or if it felt like some sort of past life memory when I came into this knowledge. And I think that maybe it's because we all started living this way, if you rewind the clock back far enough. And maybe we can segue into that, because I'd like to know your thoughts on that as well, because there's some discussion about, human beings and in the Garden of Eden, like what are, were we breatharians to start out, and then we started having fruits just for pleasure, and fruits are kind of our perfect food, but intermingled with periods of long fasting and dry fasting and water fasting. So the people that I see that are really pushing the boundaries of this field, and where I'm kind of steering my ship gradually, because I know I'm only 9 months in and I'm trying not to go too fast, although I've covered a lot of ground in under a year, I must say. So I'm proud of that. But it would be the people that are like really on the mono fruits and really doing fasting and, stints of breatharianism and unleash our true potential as a human. But to just cap that off, like as far as living on less and gravitating towards the fruits mostly, that's where I'm trying to take my journey, because I think that that's going to lead to reactivating some of the dormant abilities that humans have that have been shown by these people who have lived really long, or people that have psychic phenomenon where they're telepathic, telekinetic, claircognizance, clairvoyance, clairsentience, these impossible feats of musicianship, impossible feats of mathematics. You have savants. And so I think that there are these little blips in certain people of this potential, this human potential that we are not fully realizing that at this point in time. But I think the fasting, the prayer, the fruitarianism is a gateway into moving more towards that direction, the nonviolence, and how even the animals would be living off of plants. I think that's a huge part of it as well, because that there is a spiritual and karmic debt that's happening if we're predating on living creatures. If you take that out of the equation, then I think that's going to unlock a lot of these abilities that are going to lead to a better future for humans, and especially for Mother Earth. I've never been so inspired by something. I knew that I always wanted to have a YouTube channel for over a decade. And if you look back on my channel, there's little videos along the way. I think I started it like six or 7 years ago or something like that. But I always felt like something was kind of like missing, or that yoga was great and fitness was great, but it wasn't really my calling. And it wasn't until I found natural hygiene that I was like, oh my God, that's my baby. That is my calling. This is my niche. This is the message. This is the truth that I've been looking for the whole entire time. And it was right under my face with the alkaline diet for 23 years. But it happened at a time in my life where I was mature enough and I had done enough shadow work to kind of incorporate these energies into my life without feeling like I needed to be a literal meathead, And so everything happens in divine timing for a perfect reason anyway. But that's my goal, is to feature more people on my YouTube channel, and I have a podcast going there, and I just want to keep interviewing people. I'm kind of like becoming obsessed with it. It's amazing because I love hearing people's stories. Even if somebody's not following the exact same lifestyle as us, we can learn from each other, and we can help guide each other towards those common elements of human truth, whether you call it natural law, these principles that are talked about in the Essene Gospels and then are echoed in the Bible and echoed in other texts since antiquity, that, where we're all moving towards a more uplifting and healthy direction. The monad is a reflection of, the big picture, and so the more that we each become healthy, we're just raising that for everybody else. So that's my goal. It's just Blake Herrick. That's my YouTube channel. Blake Herrick is also my Instagram, where I'm just posting reels, which are just chopped up from the podcast. That's kind of the content that I want to be doing right now. But I also want to put more solo content out there, just more so for just to keep the algorithms happy and to kind of fill the gaps in between when I have podcasts, and also just to showcase my services that I want to provide people. I do want to do this full time. That's my goal. And to do that, I need to monetize it. I'm not like a super greedy person. I don't need to, make it rain like crazy. But I loved when I was coaching full time as a fitness coach. And my goal was to monetize that and be able to do it online, so that I could, travel around and go to the different fruit festivals. There's some coming up in the Amazon, some coming up in Vietnam and Bali and all this stuff. And I want to have the freedom to do that sort of thing. But I also, want to help people. So if you go to my website, which is just called rawfood.lifestyle, I have a community going, which is a very low cost option where we do weekly group coaching calls. It's basically like a group fitness class, but for your health and fitness, and your diet, and helping you with juice fasting, and transitioning into a raw food lifestyle. But you can also hire me as a coach, and I offer single sessions, 6-session packages at a discounted rate if you buy a package. And coming up, I'm going to be doing a juice fasting cohort, which is kind of like a course, but we all do it together. And that's going to be in the beginning of the year, kind of like for New Year's resolutions and stuff. And that's going to be kind of like a middle price point between my coaching and between the community. So it should be very accessible for people. It's going to come with a full juice fast protocol that you can keep forever. And we're all going to get a bunch of mucoid plaque out, hopefully.